So we get to finally talk about the iPhone SE second generation and see how this specific iPhone holds up in the beginning part of 2023. Now I'm going to do my best to kind of predict how this iPhone's going to hold up the next year, but I'm definitely going to tell you this is one of those iPhones that I feel very, very indifferent about. I'm not super keen for you to go ahead and upgrade this iPhone immediately, but I'm also not super upset with this iPhone either. But I'm not really going to recommend people to buy this iPhone. It's a very, very interesting device. So if you want to pick up some iPhones, I would recommend this here. Links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside of this specific phone, what was very, very interesting was that this was an iPhone that was pretty much recycling the older parts of some older iPhones. Now the SE lineup is notorious for doing this, and I actually like the iPhone SE lineup a lot. It's probably one of my favorite cheap offerings from a major manufacturer like Apple. But with this specific lineup, it was very weird how when this iPhone came out, it was a pretty good iPhone. And then within 2 weeks, I kind of got old of it before I even got it in hand. I kind of started thinking about it, and it was already kind of an outdated design back in 2020. And Apple pretty much did the same exact thing in 2022. So this iPhone's design is still kind of current, but it's still a very old design. You have a 4.7-inch Retina IPS panel on the front, 750p. And I don't think it's a bad panel. I think it's an okay panel at best. I wouldn't not get this phone because of the panel. It's just the outdated design. It's the home button on the front that just looks a little bit dated. It's the top bezel as well. But also, it's the lack of that gesture-based design. So with this iPhone, basically you have to click the home button if you want to go home. If you want to double or multitask, you have to double click the home button. Things like that are very archaic nowadays. When you have something like an iPhone 14 or iPhone 13, 12, whichever one, you have a way of actually interacting with the whole entire UI without having to click on buttons. You can just swipe up. You can just, get between apps like that. And it makes things feel so much faster. In fact, the iPhone SE 2 feels slower sometimes than my iPhone 10, which is older than this iPhone. So it's just because of that gesture-based design, it makes things feel a lot faster. And this iPhone lacks it. On the bottom, we have the Lightning port, which is great. No headphone jack or anything. And on the back, we have that standard glass back, which I think is great. I don't think all these phones have to have frosted glass backs, but I do actually prefer frosted glass backs a lot. But in this case, still perfectly fine. I don't really have too much to complain about in the body standpoint. Now we have the camera on the top left. We have wireless charging on this phone. We have IP certification on this device as well. And I do think overall, it still feels pretty good. Doesn't feel like a cheap phone. I would probably recommend you, like I said before, to at least look at some of the more recent iPhones and at least look at some speed comparisons and things like that. Because that, home button does make things feel a lot slower. Even if your phone has the latest, chipset, like the iPhone SE 3, it can feel older and slower than some newer iPhones or some older iPhones. So in terms of the outside, that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the camera setup, like I mentioned before, this thing has that 12 megapixel wide angle camera on the back. You can do 4K at 60 on this camera. On the front, you can use, you have that 7 megapixel camera, and you can do 1080p at 30 on the front of that camera. Now, I will say this camera is not an outdated camera on this iPhone. I think it's an okay, I think it's a good camera. It's not a horrible camera. It still works and everything. But, when compared to the competition, even when compared to phones nowadays, you are missing out on a lot of core features. One, you're missing out on additional camera sensors. The camera sensor inside this phone isn't even that big, but it's a single camera. So you take that as you can. It's, no telephoto lens, no ultra-wide camera. That can kind of cause a toll on some people who are probably planning on buying an iPhone like this, especially if you're wanting to go ahead and, utilize crazy new features. Well, you're not going to be able to do that on a phone like this since it doesn't support it. Also, the front camera of this iPhone isn't that great either. I mean, it's still okay. If you're in outdoor conditions with good lighting, you're going to be able to take good photos on whatever camera you have. But it's not until you actually go ahead and get into, noisier conditions like dark rooms or dark settings. And that's where these cameras start looking a little bit more, I guess, not as good. I even had a chance to compare this camera to pretty much all the other cameras after this iPhone, including the iPhone SE 3, iPhone XS, iPhone 11, 12, some other iPhones here and there. And there are definitely some big differences for sure. You're missing out on a lot of features and those camera settings as well. So in terms of that, it's okay, but it's definitely not a selling point of this specific phone. But I will say with the software and the longevity portion of this iPhone, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. So with the iPhone SE 3, like I said, you're actually getting a fairly decent chipset. So it's still the Apple A13 Bionic. This phone theoretically has the same chipset as the iPhone 11, so you could say that this iPhone is going to last as long as those iPhones. It does have less RAM, but I don't think that's going to matter here. With something like the iPhone SE 2, this phone is still going to be supported for many years to come. I mean, I probably would say for the next 3 years, 4 years at the very least, this phone's still going to be around. Maybe it'll get 2 more years of software support and then maybe a year of security updates, but this phone's not going anywhere anytime soon. So if you needed a phone that's going to last you just a little bit more time, maybe this one is a good one as a side device. That way, if you're going through and you have to use a phone temporarily for the time being, I don't think this is a bad choice at all. So in terms of the software and the longevity, you're still getting software updates. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And that's pretty much all I have to say here. Now, in the performance side, this phone does have that Apple A13 Bionic chip inside of it. And that is a very good chipset to have, but it also has 3 gigabytes of RAM. Now, it's not the most powerful phone. It's not even the most powerful phone for the dollar point at this time. You could have easily gotten an iPhone 11 Pro for probably cheaper than $400 when this thing retailed. But I still think for the iPhone SE 2, it's not a slow phone. The only issue that I have with this phone is the no gestures. You would not believe how slow phones feel when you have to click the home button over and over and over again. I don't know what it is, but it's just, it's clearly what Apple wants to do is they want these phones to feel slower, even though they're not slower. If you're playing a game on this phone, it's going to feel theoretically just as fast as the iPhone 11. It's just the rest of the UI that can feel a little bit slower here and there. Now with the iPhone SE 2, I think this is a very good performing phone still. You can still play tons of games. You can still, you're still supported with software. So you still have a bunch of stuff going in that area as well. You have, a light, tasker, you're just going through and just texting people, going on FaceTime calls and whatnot, Snapchat and TikTok. This application or this phone is going to be perfectly fine. And you're really not going to be missing on it too much in that area. Even, like I said, on heavier intensive situations, you're going to be fine as well. It's probably not until you go into maybe super high-end video editing, or you're planning on playing games at super high graphics, I've tested a lot with Genshin Impact on the highest graphic settings. The phone is playable, but it does actually go ahead and warm the phone up like crazy. So that is another thing you're probably just going to have to keep in mind. It's not a big deal, but again, it's one of those things to kind of remember. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now the battery life was probably one of the worst areas of this phone. 1821 mAh battery. It's not horrible, battery life, but it was one of those things that kind of stood out to me at that time. And, it's just one of those things I have to know. So to kind of sum up this video, what I'll tell you is, I think the iPhone SE 2nd generation, I think it sits in this weird area on this, in this specific year. I don't think this specific phone is necessarily worth it to buy, but I don't think it's a iPhone you have to upgrade from, meaning that if you currently own the iPhone SE 2, I would say keep it. If you're having a good time, then, keep it. It's not really, there's no problem with owning it. But if you are planning on getting this iPhone, I would just recommend weighing your options. If you have the option of buying an iPhone 11 in the used market or an iPhone 10R in the used market, I would almost probably recommend going down that direction rather than going and getting the iPhone SE 2. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More important than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.